The words of the Gospel of Luke, which have been preserved by the Church and handed down to us through the centuries for our hearing, our understanding, and our discussion this evening. About that time, Caesar Augustus ordered a census to be taken throughout the empire. This was the first census when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Everyone had to travel to their own ancestral hometown to be accounted for. So Jesus went from the Galilean town of Nazareth up to Bethlehem in Judah, David's town, for the census. As a descendant of David, he had to go there. He went with Mary, his fiancée, who was pregnant. While they were there, the time came for her to give birth. She gave birth to a son, her firstborn. She wrapped him in a blanket and laid him in a manger because there was no room in the hospital. There were sheep herders camping in the neighborhood. They had set night watches over their sheep. Suddenly, God's angel stood among them, and God's glory blazed around them. They were terrified. The angel said, "Don't be afraid. I'm here to announce a great and joyful event that is meant for everybody worldwide. A Savior has just been born in David's town, a Savior who is Messiah and teacher. This is what you're to look for: a baby wrapped in a blanket and lying in an manger." At once, the angel was joined by a huge angelic choir singing God's praise. "Glory to God in the heavenly heights, peace to all men and women on earth who please God." As the angel choir withdrew into heaven, the sheep herders talked it over. "Let's go over to Bethlehem as fast as we can and see for ourselves what God has revealed to us." They left, running, and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. Seeing was believing. They told everyone they met what the angels had said about this child. All who heard the sheep herders were impressed. Mary kept all these things to herself, holding them dear, deep within herself. The sheep herders returned and let loose, glorifying and praising God for everything they had heard and seen. It turned out exactly the way they'd been told. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. I love getting the chance to sing all the verses of all those hymns because they're full of words that we never get to sing or use any other time in our life. You can just see the weatherman tomorrow trying to say, "And the cloven skies." People will be writing and saying, "What is a cloven sky? What does that look like? Is it a sky full of cloves? Or is it one that is cleft? And how do you have a cleft sky?" I know cleft palates, but cleft skies. What's a cloven sky? It's like a couple weeks ago, we used the word glistering. And I asked people that day, how many of you have ever used that in a sentence? Try it tomorrow morning at breakfast. "Honey, you look glistering this morning." The person sitting across from you may not know exactly what to respond and how to respond because they may not know what it means. What does it mean to be glistering? What does it mean to be cloven? There are words in these stories that only come up here. Now, the translations that we were using for tonight are from a source called The Message, which was written by a fellow named Eugene Peterson, who's a Presbyterian minister, whose father was a butcher in the Midwest. Actually from your town, nearby, where you grew up, Susie. And the whole thing about his translation was that since it was a small town, like the one I come from a town of 800 people, there was nothing in that town except for the IGA and the Episcopal Church, which is how I got here. In this small town, it was a butcher shop that held all the attraction. And Eugene Peterson's father entertained all the men and the women in town in his butcher shop because he was interested in the Bible. And as he was cutting pieces of meat, they were discussing Jeremiah and Ezekiel and all those very strange, blistering, and clothing things. I bet you they use clothing a lot. And he came up with this translation as a way that people in his town could understand what was going on. If you're used to the regular Christmas story, then you miss some of those words that you're used to hearing in the story. And one of them is one that I was talking about earlier today in the service. So those of you who were here at the 9:30 service, all two of you, all of you that were here this morning, you just have to tune out for a second because I'll be repeating myself a little bit. But one of the, some people are looking and saying, we had a 9:30 service this morning? We did. We had to finish the fourth Sunday of Advent before we could get into Christmas Eve. And so for the last couple of weeks, we had been hearing, for the last 4 weeks, we've been hearing stories that were not from the Bible, but were from behind the text of the Bible to try to explain how it is that we get all the traditions we have about Christmas that are not in the Bible. Like, what's one? What's one tradition we have in Christmas that is not found anywhere in the Bible? A tree, yes. I mean, not a fir tree. Of course, you won't find a fir tree in this church tonight either. We decorated the church, for those of you who weren't with us last week, we decorated the church in the style of the Elizabethan period. And in that time, fir trees, or conifers, or whatever, you know, the ones, spruces and all that, they were considered to be pagan.
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus, yes. You don't hear that. But his chair is up there, you see. The Lord of the Dance. That belongs to the Lord of the Dance. And what happened was in the 16th century, when the Lord of the Dance became, he was a young boy at that time, when the tradition went on, it got conflated with another tradition of the saint from Denmark in the name of Nicholas, and all of a sudden they left a chair for that guy, and they're still leaving it in every mall in the country. But that's how it came together. What other Christmas tradition do we have that's not in the Bible? The Kings. The Kings are in the Bible, but they're only in one story in Matthew, and we didn't read it tonight. And we have this whole tradition around the Kings, and how many were there in the Bible? No, it doesn't say. It doesn't even say they're kings. It says wise men, excuse me, no number. And until last century, until the 19th century, there were 70 kings. They got pared down to 3 because it was a better Trinitarian number and all that sort of thing. So that all works well. What else? What else is not in the Bible that we celebrate? What's the one we were talking about this morning? What's the name of Mary's mother? Now, how do you know that? It's not in the Bible. Heart? Art. Oh, art. Yes, from famous artworks. But there's nowhere in the Bible that tells us who Mary's mother is. Yeah.
They had it on Channel 47, believe it or not.
Well, that's an authority, yeah.
It was the Proto-Evangelion, is that it?
The Proto-Evangelion of James, yes, that very famous one that everyone knows. Yes, also known as the Gospel of James. Everybody until the 19th century knew that book, basically, but it got sublimated. But from that story comes some very important things. Comes the thing of her being the ever virgin, being the mother of God, being who her parents were, Anne and Joachim, and all sorts of things. The whole story of John the Baptist, and who his family was and how he was related to Jesus, and all that all comes from the Proto-Evangelion of James, which is not one of the books that we read, but it's part of our Bible tradition. All the stuff with holly and ivy and mistletoe and all the other things, but even the religious things, even where the baby is in the manger, in which town and all that, none of that is in the Bible. So I thought I'd talk tonight about something that is. But it's not in tonight's lesson because Eugene has changed the words. I was fascinated as I was preparing. You know, if you've been a priest, I've been a priest 25 years this coming year. And if you've done your 25 best sermons at Christmas, or even if you've only done one or two, then you say, well, what else is there to say? If you said it, and you don't change the lessons. Every year we read Luke. Every year. We've been reading Luke since I was born. 51 years I've heard the story of Luke. It doesn't ever change. The only thing that changes are the interpretations of it, perhaps, or sometimes a different translation. But in the translation, usually, it talks about Jesus being wrapped up in something. What is it? Swaddling cloth. Now, what is a swaddle cloth? That's another one of those words, like cloven in blistering. Looks like a mummy. No, not really, but it's the right idea. It is stripped. It is stripped. But instead of going circular like this, it's cloven like this. So it's wrapped around the legs and up around the arms. If you've ever seen the very famous picture of a Nez Perce Indian, I think his name was Edward Johnson, one of the most famous pictures of the early part of the 20th century, and the baby's like this, and he's all cloven and wrapped up in swaddling cloths. He can't even move. And those of you in the nursing or doctor profession, you may know that there's a big move towards, or maybe mothers, you know this, big move towards swaddling again, because when you swaddle a baby, the baby is just like what was described in that poem I read, like a beetle on its back, and it can't move. In fact, they think that swaddling is a very, very good thing, because then the baby cannot turn over and smother himself. And so it's been one of the great moves towards curing SIDS in children, silent infant death syndrome. And swaddling is in the Middle East and in primitive or more primitive cultures of the past has been a very, very big thing. But Luke mentions it twice. Now, what's interesting about this is it's not mentioned anywhere else in the whole Bible. When you come across a word that's mentioned twice in one gospel, but never mentioned anywhere else in the entire Bible, you have to say, all right, he's trying to tell us something. What? You've heard swaddling cloths. You could say it too. Even you gave, right? You know, you're not as old as I am. You haven't heard this 51 times every year, but you know it's swaddling cloths. What importance could that possibly have that Luke wants to tell us about that, not once, but twice, in 20 verses of his gospel, his good news about Christmas? What could it possibly be?
All babies are wrapped in swaddling clothes, so he's just like us.
He's just like us? You know, I've heard that interpretation. In fact, one of the major biblical scholars has said exactly that. That's the point. How much more human can God get than being wrapped up in a diaper? and swaddled. Actually tied down for us, available to us, on earth, can't move, there, present, not going anywhere. If the attempt in writing the Gospels is to bring God closer to us, in the attempt of the incarnation, which we celebrate tonight, that God has made human flesh, takes on human form, if the intent is that God is to come closer to us, God cannot get any closer than a baby in a manger that can't move, and even the manger can't go anywhere. Is restricted. Totally restricted, totally only for human viewing. That's my interpretation. What would be another? Why else would you have a story of swaddling? What else? Yeah.
The angel told the shepherds, this is how you will recognize him. He's wrapped in swaddling clothing.
No, and that goes back to Mimi's statement, because the shepherds were like, not going to recognize him. No, everybody at that time was swaddled. So it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. You know, you're going to know him as soon as you see him. Only babe there wrapped in swaddling cloths, and then going to the emergency room, I mean the baby room there, you know, with the hospital, and then there's 500 babies wrapped in swaddling cloths, and they're saying, what type of joke is this? But it does go back to what Mimi says. No, this babe, in saying it that way, the angel saying it, is this babe is just like every other one. When you get there, you'll find that they're unique, but you won't know that yet, because it looks just like every other baby.
Was the swaddling cloth white? Or was it another color other than everyone else's?
It was usually white, or it was unbleached muslin, so it was probably sort of a yellowish white, an off-white.
Could it be to protect him from the hay that he was lying on?
Well, that would help, I'm sure. Yeah.
Is Luke trying to foreshadow the end of the story?
Oh, you've been reading ahead. Sue said, is Luke trying to foreshadow what's coming up? Yes, most definitely. Because the same bandages, in the same way that the body is wrapped for the baby, is the same way that the body is wrapped when Jesus is put in the tomb. In fact, even to this day, it is a tradition for people in the Far East who are going on a long trip to wrap swaddling cloth around their body if they're traveling with a company of people, because should somebody die in the desert before you can get somewhere, you have to have something in order to wrap the body. So you'll see, Irene and I went together to see Hidalgo. Remember when we saw that Hidalgo? There was a scene where the one man is getting undressed, and or you've seen that probably in the cartoons where they keep on unwrapping and unwrapping and unwrapping and unwrapping and unwrapping the thing around his waist, and he goes around in circles. That is a swaddling cloth, and the purpose of that is just what I said. In case someone should die on your journey, you have to be prepared. So that is standard wear, even today, in the Middle East among men and women who are traveling, nomadic types. And the foreshadowing that's being done here, the reason that it's done, is to try to give us an idea that there's something more to the story. If you think about it, Luke frames the very beginning, chapter 1, and the very end in chapter 24 of Luke, both have to do with the wrapping of the body. So you get an idea, therefore, that this story is about the body of Christ. Literally. But also, then what that means figuratively in the Christmas message. It is that the people come and are gathered and see Jesus. That's important. But they have to see him as he is, as an equal. The whole idea is that you get to meet God face to face, one-on-one. But then what do you do? Because that's what some people say that they want. Even when people die, we say that they've gone to meet their Maker. They've gone to meet God. That's, in essence, that's what we work towards our whole lives. But once we've done that, let's say we get to do that in this life, then what? The gospel story, Christmas, is about the then what? Easter tells the then. Then he was risen from the dead. But then what? They say, oh my God, he was risen from the dead. What do we know about this guy? And they go back and they tell the earlier story about him. And somebody says, well, there's certain things you have to remember to put in there. And they say, like what? Well, don't forget the swaddling cloths. They're saying, what? Yeah, you gotta have the swaddling cloths in there or it's not the real story. Well, they had to work that out over 2,000 years or so in order to figure out why it was important. But Luke does frame his gospel in the swaddling cloth idea. And the reason is because he is saying, figuratively, that he wants to bind all of us, metaphorically speaking, into the story. He wants us all to get wrapped up in it. He wants us to say these words that we only use once a year, if that, and know what they mean, and then all of a sudden get transported, taken back to both events, the resurrection, but also the birth. Obviously, one can't happen without the other, but it is the resurrection that happens first in the story, and then everything is told backwards from there. So you have to have that Easter event before Christmas can mean anything. If that's true, that means that the babe, as you said, foreshadows what's going to happen, but also comes with a great price tag. Comes with something that we're supposed to stand up and sit up and notice. We're supposed to notice that he's in swaddling clothes. So if we notice it, then what? So what? Tell me what? Now that you've heard it, now that you know it, so what? What difference does it make? Has anything changed? Now that you know it? Why? You think? Is there something more to the story? Is there something we missed? Were we supposed to go back and get something that we didn't pick up along the way? What didn't happen? You know what didn't happen? What didn't happen is you haven't had a chance to get up and leave church and say, do you have any idea what he was talking about tonight? You haven't had a chance to share the story. You haven't had a chance to explain the story to one another and talk about it. Tomorrow morning, I know somebody's going to say something, probably tomorrow at breakfast, they're going to say something that I was just wonderful. You know, whatever. Just to bring it up again, to see if anybody picked up on it, remembered anything. And if you come back ever again next year, or any time before then, hopefully you'll remember that if he didn't say anything else at Christmas, you remember I had no idea what he was talking about, but I remember the diaper story, the swaddling ball thing. And the reason I say that is because if you do not talk and share the story, it absolutely has no meaning. None. The reason that the gospel was written was to get you to share the good news, the story, with one another, to discuss it, to talk about it. What does it mean? Does it mean anything to us anymore? How can we make it alive for us again? Is there any reason to ever tell again, why are you here? Oh, Frank didn't dare answer. Okay, go ahead. Yes. Why are you here? Besides
It's a video. I don't know. I feel like you're stretching to connect the swaddling clothes at birth and the clothing at death. I want to know of what meaning does the clothes have? Like, I was trying to think, maybe it's the wrapping of the body in the Holy Spirit, and that's symbolized by the cloth, or something else. But I want more than just pieces of cloth on both beginning and end of life.
And where will you get that?
Well, I totally agree, through discussion and sharing of a story. But that's what I want you to share.
Well,
you know, what do others think?
It's a stretch for me, because I don't know that it has to do with the Spirit particularly. But I do think that the answer doesn't lie in the church anyway. It lies within, not the institution itself, it lies within the people and the time of the story. One of the interesting things about this is that this story has been told forever and ever and ever, for 2,000 years as we sang the hymn. It's changed a little bit along the way, but it's still basically the same story. And the only reason that we're even here tonight is because people bothered to tell the story. No other reason. The church can't make you come, not anymore. They can make you feel guilty about it. They can make it difficult for you in towns of 800 people if you don't go to church. But nobody is forcing anybody, well, maybe some family members tonight, to be here. But the whole idea is the reason we come is, yeah, we want to hear the story. We want to hear some good news. We want it to lift us up. We want it something to take home with us, to chew on in the morning and after that. But I say, after all that's done, then what? There has to be more of a connection. And the connection, I think, can only happen if we stop and we wonder what the words mean that we've heard tonight. If you don't stop and wonder, if you don't go back and read over that story again, take it out tonight when you get home, read over it again, and you'll find some words that say, you know, I've read this story I don't know how many times, but I never noticed that before. Never heard that before. Never got that before. The song that we were singing at the beginning of the service, there's a part of it here. Just listen to this. It says, who can count how many crosses still to come or long ago crucified the King of Heaven? How many times did you hear a harsh C there? Well, that same thing happens in the Gospel of Luke itself when Jesus dies. The moment that Jesus dies, you hear all these things. It says, the crowd shouts, crucify him, crucify the King. All these sounds. The minute he dies, everything gets very sibilant. And they say, suddenly there was a voice from heaven. And the centurion said, truly, this was the Son of God. It was very, very peaceful. Then in chapter 24, Luke, all of a sudden, it opens up and it says, when they were at the tomb at dawn, and everything's very, very open, all of a sudden, these words, which I've heard 1,000 times, because it's a living word now that we pass down through generations, have a meaning that they never had before. I'm beginning to hear things and see things in the words that I didn't know before. But why? Well, because I was thinking how I was going to try to explain it to you. And I was thinking about how we're going to discuss this. And that's why we have a dialogue sermon and not just a preaching sermon. Well, it's a little preaching time. Yeah.
What strikes me here, and that's the first time it actually strikes me, and as you know,
Welcome to the strike.
I've grown up in the church and I heard this story every year, so it's nothing new. But what strikes me here is that the shepherds talked it over and they went to look at it, and they told everybody that they met the angels and that everything happened the way it was told to them. So the point why they believed was they were told this is going to happen, not that there was a baby in the manger.
Well, I think it's amazing. Nobody says, you've been seeing angels, you've been out in that field too long.
Exactly.
I mean, if you think about how incredible the story is, and we get up and we sing all these hymns about it, which is great. I love the hymns and all that. But we're singing words that are really hard to believe. And that we don't use in any other part of our lives, generally speaking. Even preachers don't use it. I don't get together with other preachers and say, let's talk about the heavenly angels today. What about you, Joe? Shepherds, were they nice to you? Yeah, me too. No, we don't talk about that. We only talk about it in this context. Why is that? Because what we're talking about, what we're doing tonight, is something that is part of a tradition that is only done maybe at this time, but it still binds us. There are people who have come back here who've been coming here for years. There's some people who are here for the very first time. They never come back again. But they're here, and they're sharing, and they're part of the community. This community will never be configured the same way exactly again. And so this has a story of its own. Even if it's just about swaddling cloth. It has a story that says, what we're doing here means something. It's important. And why it's important, I think, Frank, is because we are struggling as best we can to understand the mystery of God and how it is that God is aggressive enough to want to come close to us in order for us to share this story. I believe that God is the aggressor. We often think that we should come to church to seek God. I think actually we come to church so God knows where to find us. And it'd start right there. Right in this pew, right here. Right here. Okay, right there with David. Yeah, we'll start right there. Because in the people gathered, that is the church, and that is God's gift to the world, in my opinion. And the reason we come together is because we come together to make the gift real. If we do not tell the story, it dies. If we do not share the story, it does not live. If we do not dare to speak the words that are only spoken once a year, they have absolutely no meaning except for once a year. So I'm begging for more. I'm asking for more. I'm saying, let's speak those words. Let them not be just Christmas words. Let's talk a lot of swaddling. Let's talk a lot of glistering. Let's talk a lot of cloven skies. Let's sing those things from those hymns that we don't sing. I think, let's sing a Christmas hymn every week this year. How about that? Just to remind us.
What does glistering and cloven mean?
Oh, you have to see me afterwards. It's too long to get into. Cloven skies mean cleft skies, one sky that opens up. And a glistering is something that is glistening with a lot of Listerine. It's a lot of, it's absolutely glowing.
You look glistering.
I look glistering? It's my blood pressure, I'm sure, at this moment. I'm going to end it here. But only because we need to get on to more of it. We need to be able to be able to say by 12 o'clock in 10 minutes that this is truly a midnight clear, and that we're clear to go on with our lives. But not without the promise that you'll come back and try again, and that you'll take some of these words, you'll discuss them, and that you'll say to each other, Merry Christmas, and understand that that is so full of possibilities and so full of meaning that you want to go back, look through the hymnal, check your songbooks out, check with each other, and say, so tell me, what does it mean to you? That's interesting because this is what it means to me. And then ask some other people what they think it means. My experience has been that Christmas means, just like almost anything else theological, something different to every single person. People don't even repeat the same things. And it's in telling that story that people come together, that worlds are reborn, that people lay down a lot of their hurts and prejudices in ways that are just not possible any other way. So, if you're interested in peace, if you're interested in community, if you're interested in just having just a little bit of harmony for a little bit of while in your life, start by talking to your neighbor about the meaning of Christmas and ask them if they know what a swaddling cloth is.